Thank you to everyone who is joining us. I'm Lila LaHood. I'm the publisher of the San Francisco Public Press. We are hosting this event today on coronavirus scams. I'm going to pass things off to Laura Wenis. Laura is the host of Civic, our daily news and public affairs show, which airs on KSFP 102.5 FM in San Francisco at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. You can also get it streaming from our website, and you can sign up for the podcast. It's Civic, and you can find it on all of your favorite podcast players. Laura, I'm going to hand things off to you, and let me know if you need any help during this event. Otherwise, take it away.
Great. Well, thanks, Lila. So we wanted to talk about scams today because scams have been in the news because scammers take advantage of opportunities, and the coronavirus pandemic presents exactly that. People are concerned about their health, their jobs, their loved ones. There's fear to take advantage of. So today we want to bring you some information about the scams that have been identified, how to prevent someone from taking advantage of you or your loved ones, what warning signs to look out for, and how you can help or get help. So I'd like to give our three panelists an opportunity to present themselves. We're joined today by our district attorney, so why don't we start with you?
Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks to all of you for the important work you do on this issue. My name is Chesa Boudin, and I am the district attorney of the city and county of San Francisco. I'll say more in a little bit, but wanted to just start with that introduction.
Great, and then we've also got two folks from the Institute on Aging. Why don't we start with you, Shawna? And you're on mute, so you might want to unmute yourself.
That would be because I have a 2-year-old with me. My name's Shawna Reeves. I'm Director of Elder Abuse Prevention at the Institute on Aging.
Thanks. And Glen?
Yes, I'm Glen Fishman, the Program Coordinator for the Elder Abuse Prevention Program, and excited to be with you again.
Great. Well, I'm glad to have you all here. I want to start by talking about the District Attorney's Office because there's a series of pages on the District Attorney's website dedicated to various types of consumer fraud, including phone calls, identity theft, fake professionals. It runs the gamut. What's the District Attorney's role exactly in identifying, preventing, or addressing scams?
Well, we do a range of work depending on the nature and circumstances. If there's a crime in progress, we encourage people to always call 911. We want our emergency first responders to be able to respond immediately. But the district attorney's office plays a critical role in providing services to victims of crime and also investigating crime after it has occurred. And so if there's something that's happened, it's no longer in progress, you can report that to our victim services team or to our fraud prevention hotline. We've got investigators, we've got lawyers who are working around the clock on these issues. And we know that in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are unique frauds and scams that are being perpetrated, particularly on the elderly and the vulnerable, people who are already in fear and anxiety about their well-being, their family's well-being, are being targeted by scamsters and fraud artists. And so our office is available to both help provide services if you have been the victim of such a fraud, or to take a report about something that has recently occurred. And we'll work with our other law enforcement partners to investigate and bring justice to the case.
Can you say a little bit more about that process looks like? When a report comes to you, where else does it go? And what are the next steps sort of in the investigation?
Very much depends on the particular facts of the case, but we have trained, experienced investigators who, in the appropriate circumstances, will speak with witnesses, take statements, and potentially even author arrest or search warrants for suspects who have perpetrated these kinds of financial or elder abuse crimes. In other instances, we'll work closely with the San Francisco Police Department or other local law enforcement to do follow-up investigation that those agencies may have begun before the case was brought to our attention.
So Glen, you and I have talked previously about how seniors are particularly vulnerable to consumer fraud. Could you illustrate for us why that is and how elders are disproportionately impacted?
Right. Well, we have the situation now where sheltering in place is causing more isolation for seniors, less gatekeepers keeping an eye on them. So they're just much more vulnerable to different scams.
And how are they disproportionately impacted? I think we've talked a lot about just the financial impact of scams and that they can have.
Right. Well, if you're speaking to the fact that in the United States, a majority of the wealth is held by people 60 and older, and scammers know that. So, you know, that's a target for them, as well as possible cognition issues happening for older adults, making them more vulnerable.
Shawna, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, this whole situation is really highlighting what was already a problem. So elders who are isolated are more at risk of victimization. Right now, elders are more isolated than they've ever been due to the shelter in place. They're also really scared about what might happen to their health or their finances. And now they're dependent on others for their needs. And so this is really a perfect storm for victimization. There's so much to say about that. So there are the traditional reasons that elders are more at risk for victimization. Like Glen said, they tend to have more wealth, especially the 75 and over group. They actually have twice as much wealth as boomers, and we're already worried about boomers. And then there's the economic downturn that we're facing. And so you're gonna have people who are gonna see this as an opportunity. So it's that combination of the extreme isolation right now that elders are facing and their fear, plus the opportunity that people might be seeing who want to do harm to the elder or take their money.
And there's also this the impact of the digital divide. I mean, so many of these scams and of modern fraud happens digitally or on the phone in emails or through phone calls or things like that. Is there a particular risk factor related to that as well?
My 2-year-old was talking to me.
Sorry.
In terms of the digital divide, yes, absolutely. I think it's easier for some of us to order groceries online. I want to highlight that the Department of Disability and Aging Services has partnered with Shanti on really an amazing project, and the turnaround's been so quick, and it helps elders access those things that they need, like groceries, medications, those things that they might not be able to do as easily as a younger person. I can actually give you that number right now if that would help your your viewers. It's 415-355-6700. There are other reasons that digital divide will harm seniors as well. Maybe my child would like to tell you about them. I think that right now elders are going to be especially vulnerable to things like robocalls, if they weren't already before, things that happen on the phone, and internet scams, all sorts of things. I'm happy to talk about those more in a moment after I change the channel for my 2-year-old.
Sure. So the district attorney's office has something called the Victim Services Division. It's got an advocacy unit, a claims division, people who work on restitution. The thing with scams, to my mind, is that people often don't even know that a crime is occurring when they're being targeted. So I'm curious if any of those services are available to victims of scams or fraud.
Absolutely. And I'll talk a little bit more about what some warning signs are so that people know what to look out for, what to avoid to keep yourself and your finances safe. But let me also give you 2 different phone numbers. We have a victim services hotline, and we also have a consumer fraud hotline. And you can call either or both depending on the particular. If you are or believe you have been the victim of a crime and you are looking for support or services, our team of amazing specialists is there to support you. You can reach them at 628-652-4100. Again, that's 628-652-4100. If you believe you've been the victim of or a witness to any kind of consumer fraud or impropriety impacting consumers, whether it be price gouging, whether it be false representations by sellers of products that amount to a crime, you can contact our consumer hotline at 415-551-9595. Again, our consumer hotline is 415-551-9595. Now, there are some warning signs. We put out videos that are available on our Victim Services Division website in multiple languages. They're up there now in English, Spanish, and Tagalog, and we'll be posting the videos in other languages over the course of the next couple of days. The links are available via my Twitter account. But what those videos explain is that there are certain red flags, particularly people who are elderly or dependent should look out for if they're interacting with a stranger. Remember that San Francisco Department of Public Health or the Center for Disease Control will never send someone to your door. If someone shows up at your door unannounced, claiming to be from one of those agencies, you should close the door immediately and get help or support from someone you trust. If someone you don't know calls you over the phone and asks for your social security number or credit card number or Medicare or Medi-Cal number, you should hang up and seek help from someone you trust immediately. If someone offers to sell you a product or a cure or a vaccine for COVID-19, remember, things that sound too good to be true usually are. There are no known vaccines for COVID-19. There are no known cures for COVID-19. If someone tries to sell you one of those things, it is almost certainly a fraud, and you should discontinue your interaction with that person, that phone call, that website, and get help from someone you trust.
So I want to keep talking on that note a little bit, because I'm curious what some of the reports are that you have been getting or your department has been getting about scams and frauds so far. Because I mean, one of the things that I've heard frequently is what you just mentioned, this idea that people might come to your door posing as a CDC or Department of Public Health official or employee and want to come inside. I'm not sure if that's actually, if official reports have been made about that yet in San Francisco. Maybe you can speak to that. But more generally, what have you been hearing that people have been experiencing?
We have heard reports of what you just described, of people showing up, pretending to be a public health official and seeking entry into the home. This is not a time to let strangers into your home. This is not a time to interact or socialize with strangers. We're encouraging people to stay home and socially isolate. And our public health workers, our actual true public health workers, know that. They may leave information on your door, but they will not seek entry into your home. And if someone does seek entry into your home that you don't know, it's almost certainly a fraud or a scamster, and you should be very careful. You should close the door. You should tell them to leave any information on your doorstep. But it is a concern. We have seen some of those reports in San Francisco. We have also heard reports of people getting solicited over the internet, text message, and phone calls, particularly elderly and dependent individuals being solicited for all kinds of different online scams to sell fake products or to offer fake services. And many of these scams are what we call phishing scams, designed to get someone's personal identifying information, social security number, or other financial details. Be very cautious if someone you don't know is asking you for any personal identifying information over the telephone, text message, or the internet. And do not engage with vendors over the internet unless they're trusted and you've worked with them in the past.
Thanks. And does either of our panelists from the Institute on Aging want to weigh in on what kind of scams you have been hearing about from your community members?
Glen?
Well, we've been definitely the phone calls offering products that never get delivered. That's a common one. The websites that can infect your computer can be an issue. Across the board, we've been hearing about all the different forms of scam now associated with COVID scare, though.
Mm-hmm.
And what can you tell people to look out for in terms of websites that might be malicious? Is there something they can look for in the URL? Is there something about the design that might tip them off? What are some warning signs?
Unfortunately, scammers are getting better at making these websites look real. So just don't click on anything that's not familiar to you. You can look it up, Google it another way to find the accurate site. Shawna, can you think of anything else that?
Yeah, the days where we said you can trust anyone with an ORG on the website are gone. So a lot of scammers have already managed to incorporate as nonprofits or just use the .org in their website. So that's not fail safe. But yeah, I think the tip that Glenn just gave you is great. Everyone needs to be super careful right now. The phishing scams, I saw some data on that. They've never seen phishing scams like this before. The amount, the types, the sophistication, it's just, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more about phishing scams and especially the phone calls, because one of the things that Glen and I on a recent Civic episode talked about was something called the Grandparent Scam and the coronavirus version of that. Honestly, when I heard about this, I thought, I might fall for this if it happened to me, if I got this phone call. Could you explain what that is and what happens, what they're asking for?
I'm gonna let Glen take this one.
Sure.
Glen's our resident expert on COVID-19 scams right now.
Thanks. So again, something that's been going on for years, the grandparent scam, to kind of sum it up, is, or the family in need scam, is you get a call early in the morning, late at night, when you might be sleeping or just waking up, a little disoriented, not clear thinking, and it's someone on the other end saying they're your grandson, or they're a police department, or a lawyer saying that your grandson is in trouble and he got arrested for something, he needs bail money or pay these fees to get him out of jail. Of course, don't tell mom and dad that this is happening. Unfortunately, people fall for this. These scammers can be very realistic. They can use social media to find specific information about someone to make it sound realistic. So now with COVID-19 going on, they're getting these calls, older adults, saying that your child is in the hospital, or your grandchild is in the hospital. They need extra care, or they need monies to get the care. So they're using that now as a scare tactic.
And let me just add in on that, if I could, for a moment. Thank you for that detail, Glen. You're exactly right. We've seen those kinds of scams perpetrated in San Francisco. I'm excited to say that one of my first mandates as district attorney was to end the use of money bail. And so that particular scam is no longer viable in San Francisco. But it's important to remember with any of these scams, the ones that Glen just described, often the perpetrators will rely on the victim or the target of their fraud to give them information to make it sound more credible. So they may not even know the name of the grandson when they initiate the call. And the call will often go something, as Glen described, like, hello, they'll know your name. Hello, is this Mrs. So-and-so? Yes, this is Mrs. So-and-so. Well, your grandson's just been arrested and he needs money for bail. Or your grandson's just been hospitalized and he needs money for bail. To which the victim will respond, my grandson, Johnny? They'll say, yes, Johnny. And then they know the name and it feels authentic. And the course of that conversation often reveals more and more information that makes the call feel more and more authentic. And so it's sort of a devious circle. It's very important if you get that kind of a call, do not offer any information. Get information if people are giving you information, and write that information down, and then get a callback phone number. Do not provide any of your own details. And then you can independently verify the health and well-being of your family. Do not rely on unsolicited phone calls. Do not offer information to people who call you unsolicited.
And if I can just piggyback on that, one idea that's come up too is maybe your family has a password that just they know. And you can ask that other person on the phone, what's our family password? The other thing to look out for is that sense of urgency. That's a real big red flag. You have to act now. Don't tell anyone. We need gift cards to get the money, things like that, or wire transfers. Those are all red flags.
Great. I know that we probably want to get to some questions soon, but before we do, I want to give all of you an opportunity to talk about what can be done. And also, Glen, if you wouldn't mind reiterating something that we also have talked about previously, a lot of this knowledge is about protecting yourself. If you hear this, if you see this sign, don't go for it. But what are some signs that our loved ones might have become the victims of a scam or fraud?
Yeah, well, that's all going to be harder now, of course, since we don't have that face-to-face interaction. But just be aware if someone's acting a little more disoriented or secretive. Those are signs. Again, maybe if we're doing online meetings with these people, check if there's behavior, their physical behavior has changed, if they're more disheveled, not dressing like they usually dress. These are kind of red flags too, that there's something might be going on that they're a victim of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shawna, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the things that we used to say before, but now again, just amplified. Not having food is one of the number one signs that someone's been financially abused. Appearance, change in behavior, those sorts of things. We'd all love it if they could just tell us outright that something happened to them, but a lot of elders are just incredibly private about money. And so we might not get those direct messages about what's happened, or they might not know what's happened. But changes in spending habits, money going towards things that they don't recall purchasing, those are all signs that someone might be being abused. Inability to pay rent, all of that for sure. I just wanted to highlight too that a lot of the focus now is on COVID scams, but we're seeing some ancillary activity as well that are related to elders being very concerned right now about those things I brought up, their health, their safety, their finances. So we're seeing an uptick in things like reverse mortgage solicitations, estate planning, funeral scams. So these aren't things that people will necessarily associate with COVID, but they're all sort of like crimes of opportunity. The Department of Business Oversight actually put out a warning today that they're expecting more foreclosure rescue scams and those sorts of things that just happen when people start to get scared. I think it's good that we keep those things in mind too. Not every scam is going to come with COVID-19 attached to it.
Right, that's a great point. I want to ask our district attorney, you've already given some resources for where people can, find out more information or report. I'm curious what the process is like of reporting something like a scam. What information should people be looking out for? What do they need to record? Are they writing something down? What's somebody going to ask about if I file a report about a scam or fraud?
Great questions, Laura. The more information our team receives, the more we can do to help, and the more we can do to bring people who perpetrate these crimes to justice. It means it's really important to take note of every single detail you can if you believe that you may be targeted. The name, the phone number, the specific requests that were made, if it's an in-person interaction, the description of the individual, any correspondence that you have in writing, any paper that they left with you, all of those details are important to preserve for the purposes of our investigation. We've had a couple people who are really creative and turn the tables on the scamsters. And when the scam artists call would-be victims and try to get information from them, some folks are able to turn the tables and actually solicit more and more information from the person who's trying to scam them. In some cases, we're even able to use those sorts of interactions to arrange to meet in person and make an arrest. But we're not encouraging folks to arrange in-person interactions. The best thing to do is discontinue the contact, discontinue the interaction with someone who may be perpetrating a harm. Reach out to us for help. And if there's follow-up, we'll be there to support you.
Wow, so you're telling me that it actually works if I try and just keep somebody on the phone who's obviously a scamster talking?
Well, in some instances it does. I'm not encouraging you or others to do that, but we have seen cases where that's worked out in the interest of justice. We've been able to get a tremendous amount of useful investigative information through those kinds of processes. Sometimes simply getting a callback number and calling back with one of my investigators on a recorded line can make a huge difference in our ability to investigate a case. So if you're in doubt, if you're concerned, get a callback number from them. If it's a legitimate business or enterprise, if it's a legitimate government actor from a health service agency, for example, they'll give you a callback number. They'll give you a name and an identification number. And then you can call back with a trusted family member or with someone from my consumer protection team advising you about how to handle that call.
Great. I just want to take this opportunity to remind everybody who's listening, we are taking your questions. Now's your opportunity to get your questions about scams answered. Put them in the chat. You should be able to find the chat function if you go to the bottom of your screen and click chat, and then you can type in a question and folks from our team will funnel them through to me and I will pass them on. For our Institute on Aging folks, can you talk a little bit about how people who are vulnerable can protect themselves and can stay connected to their communities. There's a number of resources, as I understand it, out there right now for people to plug in even as they're socially distancing.
Sure. Well, one of the things that comes to mind is the 211 number. That's a great resource for connecting you with different services and nonprofits. So I recommend calling 211 when needed. Shawna, what else do we have that we can let people know about?
I'm watching some action over here. Adult Protective Services, we mentioned yet. Incredibly important resource for elders. They can both call themselves or family members can call. What else can I think of to protect themselves?
And by the way,
Friendship line.
I was going to give the number for APS. There's a
Yes,
24-hour, 24/7 hotline, and that's 415-355-6700. You can also report it online at report2aps.org. You can even report it anonymously if it's for a neighbor or a family member, if you'd like.
And so can you say a little bit more about Adult Protective Services? Does that necessarily get law enforcement involved? Because I know that's an issue of concern for some folks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, do you want me to take that?
Sure.
Sometimes, yeah. If it looks like there's been a crime committed, those cases will be reported to law enforcement. And I do understand why that can be a concern for folks. Mostly Adult Protective Services is there to connect the elder to services, vital services that they need in the community to keep them safe. But sometimes, yes, if it looks like a crime's been committed, it will be cross-reported to SFPD.
Okay.
And vice versa, speaking of cross-reporting, if the police get a report for someone 65 or older or a disabled adult, they will contact Adult Protective Services to investigate as well.
Great. And Glen, could you talk a little bit about Friendship Line? You started to say this, and I was hoping that you might say a little bit more about it and ways that people can plug in to support each other.
Right. Well, the Institute on Aging has a Friendship Line. It's been around for decades, and it's personed by great volunteers, also 24/7. It could be a hotline. It could be a warm line, which means you could just call in or have scheduled calls. People will check in with you. So that's the Friendship Line at Institute on Aging.
Great, thanks.
If I could just pop in and also say that sometimes people, when they've been scammed, they need a lawyer and they don't know who to call. You don't want to just rifle through the phone book or go with who's on the back cover of the phone book. I've had elders do that, unfortunately. But we have lawyer referral services available to them in the San Francisco Bay Area. One of them is California Advocates for Nursing Home Reforms lawyer referral service, and also the SF County Bar Association. And I provided both of those links as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I see that we have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with this question from Olivia. Are there proactive investigations related to senior scams, or does the unit just react to complaints? I believe that's a question for the district attorney.
It's a great question. For the most part, we respond to complaints that have been filed. It's a difficult area to investigate proactively. Certainly, if we get tips or leads about an organization or an individual or a web page that is perpetrating these kinds of scams, we would respond and we would proactively build the investigation beyond the initial complaint. But it's a pretty difficult area, and we have limited resources. We're not the police department. Our budget is in the neighborhood of 10% of what the police department's budget is. And so our investigative capacity is pretty limited, and we do try to preserve it for specific actual complaints.
Great, thank you. Richard has a question about sharing information. There are whois websites that you can use to figure out which internet service providers spammers and scammers are using to send you fraudulent messages. And you can file a complaint with the ISP, so with the internet service provider. Can any of you say more about using whois and using these tech tools to reveal fraudsters?
There are, I'll just say briefly, there are a lot of resources like that. I'm not familiar with who is, but there are similar resources. If you get a phone call, for example, there's a great free resource called usphonebook.com, which is a free reverse phone number lookup. Not everyone is listed, of course, but it does allow you to do a quick and easy search if you're comfortable with the internet for free of any phone number and find out who it's registered to, get a little more information than you might have just from caller ID.
And I wondered if you could give us your take on the do not call list, which at this point to me seems like a sort of mythical object that I'm not even sure if it really exists. I think I must be on it, but I still get multiple calls a day. Is it real? Does it exist? Can I get on some kind of national do not call list?
Was that for me?
Yes.
I wish I could say I was an expert. If I were, I would get a lot less calls myself. I get a lot of calls early in the morning in foreign languages that I don't speak. I do speak some foreign languages, and I find it very frustrating. I know others do as well. I wish I had the answer. There are rules and regulations, but they're not widely followed, and it's so easy these days for folks from all over the world to make free or low-cost calls. That regardless of what rules we put in place or what enforcement efforts we take at the local level, it's very easy for people who want to engage in spamming to do so from abroad and beyond our jurisdiction.
Yeah, so I understand that that's a program of the Federal Trade Commission. Sorry, Glenn, did you want to jump in on the do not call list? I can't tell if you...
Well, just also, unfortunately, scammers can change the ID that shows up on your phone, so it might look like it's the PG&E or the San Francisco Police Department. So that's another tough hurdle that we have to deal with, is that they have the technology to tweak that ID, caller ID.
Yes, actually, while we're on the topic, I was just seeing this morning that a KTVU reporter tweeted that he'd gotten a call from his electric supplier telling him he'd been overcharged and to press 1 to receive his rebate check. Now, he was well informed and said, it probably wasn't PG&E, but maybe you could say a little bit about what are some telltale signs that the voice on the other end of the phone isn't who they claim to be. Maybe Glen or Shawna on this?
Well, I know that PG&E might be a little off topic, but they won't ever disconnect. The flip side of that is that they might kind of scare you into the fact that you need to be, your utility bill is going to be disconnected because you're haven't paid or something and there was a problem with your billing. PG&E would never cut off your electricity or gas. You would get something in the mail, a letter.
Right, and they would never call you asking you for your account number. That's another thing.
They would already know your account number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're asking for identifiable information so that they can get your account number, social security, birthday, those sorts of things.
Yep. Here's a question from Frank. Many of us who are stuck at home are looking for ways to help. Are there any volunteer opportunities to participate in contacting seniors to educate them about scams and provide them with local resource information?
Shawna and I were just talking about that earlier. Take it away, Shawna.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Yes. Okay. So there are volunteer programs popping up all around the city, the country, and also the world. They're everywhere. I'm both super heartened and happy about them and also a little bit frightened by them. I'm going to speak to San Francisco first. So absolutely use the program that San Francisco has set up. It's wonderful. They're doing background checks. Elders need food, medication, they need all these things. So please use them. What we've been in discussions about, and Glenn and I have kicked around, is whether these programs can be used as a way to get information to vulnerable elders about how they can avoid scams at this time, whether through the volunteers or through some other means. But I guess the concern I was hitting on is that, as I said before, this is a scary time for elders, and this is also a time for scammers. And so we're also a bit concerned about some of the interactions that could happen between volunteers and seniors at this time. Again, I'm very impressed by San Francisco's program. I think they're really taking this to heart and keeping in mind as they continue to design that program with Shanti. But I've seen some things in other counties that have me concerned. for instance, I don't think it's a good idea for an elder to give their credit card information to a person who will then go shopping for them and continue to have contact, and know where they live and those sorts of things. I think there are ways that we could help shore up these programs and protect elders who use them, and we're working at reaching out and offering our services for that. But there are definitely some scary things that I've been imagining. I mean, that's what I did before COVID-19, and now it's kind of in hyperdrive. But Frank, in terms of how we could actually get messaging out to elders through volunteer efforts from volunteers like yourself, I think that's a great idea, and that's something that we're definitely going to keep working at.
Glenn, did you want to add anything about ways that people can volunteer to help out their elder community members?
Lots of opportunities. I know I'm trying to help out during this time with Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly, great organization. That since they can't do home visits anymore, we're doing out calls. But again, I think 211 would have that information, and I'm sure I've seen in the past San Francisco volunteer websites that list all the different organizations.
Right. This is also a time for people to reach out to their loved ones and say, hey, like, especially loved ones who have like family members living across the country and now they're in contact with volunteers that are helping them. The family members can be an extra pair of eyes on that. I would tell every elder who's using one of these volunteer services to get information about that volunteer, if it's a program where it's transparent that way, and make sure that a trusted family member, a loved one, knows about that person and about that relationship. I'm particularly concerned about what can happen under times of stress and crisis. It's what we call trauma bonding, where someone can just kind of quickly form a bond with someone because of what's going on. There's a crisis, there's high emotions, and that really can lay the groundwork for some undue influence and some scamming down the road. So we just want elders to be aware of that, and also their loved ones to be aware that this is a time to be on heightened alert for that sort of thing, while at the same time just kind of sitting back in amazement at all the amazing volunteering that is being done and how people are coming together. I think we can hold those two things at the same time.
Somewhat related to that, there's a question here from John. He says, I received an email from a person representing an aid group for seniors in need. Their group is called San Francisco Neighbors Solidarity Network. My alarms went off when I was asked to supply the person with the names and contact info of seniors in need because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The solicitor provided me 2 ways to make a donation, Venmo and PayPal. Note, I'm 49 years old and I did not communicate back with the suspicious solicitor. In my research via Google, I find any credentialed NGOs or nonprofits with the name San Francisco Neighbors and Solidarity Network. I think that actually means he was unable to find any such group. And the email address, the solicitor, was from a free email service, gmail.com. He says, what ought to be done? I think that's a question for all of our panelists, but maybe the district attorney can take it away first. What ought to be done if you receive something like this?
Well, one of the amazing things, let me just take a step back. One of the amazing things about the moment we're living through is that these kinds of crises, these kinds of pandemics, bring out the best and the worst in us as a society, as a city, as a community. And we do have a tremendous number of people who, as with the previous question, people are looking for ways to get involved, to be supportive, to do volunteer work, to help those that are less fortunate than themselves. And there are a lot of people who, from the goodness of their hearts, want to find ways to help. We should encourage that, we should applaud that, we should support that. But we also need to make sure that people who want to take advantage of this moment and of the vulnerabilities and the anxieties and the isolation don't get away with it. And the email that John received would have made me suspicious as well, particularly given all the indications, as he said, Venmo and PayPal donations being solicited, not coming from an organized or established, known, respected nonprofit. All of those would be red flags for me. I certainly would not donate. I would discourage people from donating to that kind of a fundraising campaign without specific verifiable information or a known person who you have a trusted relationship with who is part of that organizing efforts. If you want to donate, do it through groups and organizations that have been doing the work for years and years. Don't do it for brand new groups that are unverified, untested, and unknown. And if you want help, similarly, reach out to people you've known or to organizations that have been here doing this work for years. Folks who want to step up and volunteer in this moment, there's absolutely a need for solidarity. There's a need for people at the neighborhood level to do this kind of work, but do it in partnership with existing stakeholders, community-based organizations, and known entities, so that we can avoid all of the alarms that appropriately went off for John. John, if you get that kind of situation and you want it to be investigated, by all means, send it over to my DA investigation team. We've got some great investigators who can do some follow-up work. If we do suspect that this is a front for a fraud organization, we'll get the word out quickly and hopefully shut them down.
Great, thank you. And for Institute on Aging panelists, it sounds like John's instincts were right on the money here, that a legitimate nonprofit is not going to be asking for contact information and Venmo donations right off the bat. Is that correct? And do you want to say anything else about emails posing as requests for volunteers from mutual aid organizations or NGOs? Yeah,
I think the red flag that John caught was the Gmail account. It wasn't from an organization. So that's great he caught that. So that would be very suspicious.
We would like to recruit John to become a volunteer for us to get the word out. I think this is a perfect opportunity for him. No, he's right on the money. The Venmo, the PayPal, the Gmail, the unknown entity, the crisis, all of it. Thank you, John.
I wanted to ask about who these scamsters actually are. This is a question from Seth. Are scamsters mostly domestic, foreign? Are they lone wolves, or are they part of organized crime rings? Do we know?
We don't have great research. We have some research. You'll see one study that says it's mostly professionals. You'll see another that says it's mostly family members. What we do know is it tends to be people who have created a relationship with the senior, but that could be someone who's calling the senior every day from overseas. It could also be an adult son or daughter, but it tends to be someone who has established a relationship with an elder, which makes sense because then through that relationship they're able to scam. But in terms of the breakdown of who's doing what, it's really hard to tell. And for studies that we do have, a lot of it is done through, say, adult protective services programs, but then those studies can be biased because the people who report to adult protective services are largely those who have been trained on adult protective services, and yeah, and so they're looking for different types or certain types of scams. This is all to say that we actually don't know, and you should just be on the lookout for all of it.
That's right. I'll just add in, I think, we really don't have great information, and part of it is because there's so much underreporting of these crimes. So many people who are victimized, who are elder or dependent, may not know that they've been victimized until it's too late, or there's a feeling of stigma and shame that most crime victims, especially of these kinds of scam crimes, feel, that leads people not to seek help. So we want to just encourage people to reach out, get help, report it if you believe you've been victimized. And we're here to help you. This is not something to be ashamed of. This is something that happens to people of all ages and all across the world. And it's really not something to hide. It's something where we need you to come forward if we're going to be able to help you and prevent it from happening to the next person. I will say anecdotally, we've seen cases perpetrated both by people who are native-born Americans, as well as by immigrants, as well as by people operating from abroad. We have seen it all. We recently, here in San Francisco, just last week, closed a case that we've been fighting for several years, where the victims were all elder Chinese Americans, and it was what we call a blessing scam. And the people who we convicted in that case, there were 3 different defendants. 2 of them were Chinese nationals. 1 of them was a US citizen. and they were working together in person to go in and, as I think Glen was saying, to build relationships with vulnerable dependents over time, and to then find various ways to get them to hand over large amounts of money, and in some cases people's entire life savings, money that they'd worked their whole lives hard for, and had hoped to be able to save for their own medical needs or to pass on to their families. That's what we see with some of these crimes, and it's very tragic to have someone's life savings disappear when they're in the final chapters of their own life.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make a quick note about something that we were just talking about a minute ago, about organizations claiming to be looking for volunteers or for people to make contributions. Just last week, we were talking with the Sunset Neighborhood Help Group, and you can actually find that webinar online, I believe, on our page, sfpublicpress.org, as well as a story about them. So the Sunset Neighborhood Help Group intentionally made the decision not to ask for or accept money donations because they don't want to cause any confusion about who's handling money or how it's being used. So just to keep that in mind. I'm going to go to our last question before we wrap up here. Sil wants to know, how would you recommend that we convey this information to our clients who may not be tech or computer savvy? Are there any printable materials available that they can use? Let's start with Institute on Aging. Maybe Shawna or Glen, do you have printable materials or non-digitally focused ways to get this information out?
We do. We've been tracking the materials, and we've hesitated to create our own, not only because the stuff that we've been seeing is so great, but because we know that the moment we memorialize it and put it in a document, there's going to be 5 new scams the next day. But the links that you're going to have on your website after this are all terrific. The FTC, Department of Justice. I know Sil's referring to people who aren't tech savvy, but those videos from the DA's office are outstanding. Let me just tell you, we watched them yesterday. If you can get an elder to get connected to a YouTube somewhere, those are fabulous resources. In terms of print, I know that some jurisdictions are talking about getting information out through Meals on Wheels, so getting it out with the food bags. I see no issue with trying to do that with other food programs as well. But there is always that problem of how do you message this to people who are the most isolated and the least likely to access good information, the most likely to maybe get bad information from a scammer who calls them on the phone. So those are all things we're actively working on. So thank you, Sil.
I'd also like to add that if we can incorporate and get help from our journalist friends, because print media is still popular with older adults. They still get the newspaper. They really respond to that. It's a sense of authority. So if we can get more coverage in our print newspapers, that would be great.
Great suggestion, Glen.
Well, on that note, we'll say that our interview, Glen, your and my interview about scams earlier on, did air on the actual terrestrial radio broadcast airwaves. So that's another way to get news that is non-digital, is radio, because radio is still indeed out there and going strong. Does the district attorney's office have any non-internet resources for folks? Is there places you can call, or are there broadcasts or print media going out about this?
Absolutely. We are constantly working to get new and different mechanisms out. We were doing in-person events, as some of you may recall, as recently as February. That's no longer an option for us. But we do have a hotline people can call to get support. Our victim services number, again, is 628-652-4100. And we have participated in a wide range of print materials, which have been distributed at different community events. We don't have a ton of print materials that we can distribute now. There are limits on what we can do given the COVID-19 crisis in terms of door-to-door distribution of print materials. But again, we do have folks who will answer that call, return messages. We've got an email address. We're very active, of course, on social media and other internet-based resources. But the best thing to do for folks who need help and don't have comfort with the internet is to go ahead and give our victim services team a call, 628-652-4100.
Great, thanks to you all. We want to start wrapping up here, but I want to give all of our panelists an opportunity to share any thoughts that you've just been itching to talk about that I didn't give you a chance to say anything about just yet. But any final thoughts before we close? Glen or Shawna, either of you have anything to add?
Sure. Well, something I feel like a broken record, but I really like to remind people about the sales pitch nature of a call or an email or a website, that sense of urgency, and also the forms of payment. Really be so concerned when people are requesting gift cards or wire transfers. Again, just red flags to be aware of.
Thanks.
And I'll just join Glen and Shawna in thanking all of you for your attention to this issue, for helping to raise awareness, for providing services and support and protection to those in need. At the District Attorney's Office, we really are a victims first office. We want to help, we want to prevent and protect, and we can't do it without support from our partners, and we can't do it without people having the courage to come forward and ask for help when they think they may have been victimized. So please, if you see something, say something, reach out, ask for help, rely on government officials, trusted community-based organizations, trusted family and friends, and be suspicious, be on the lookout for people who ask you, as Glen says, PayPal, Venmo, cashier's checks, personal checks. Any of those forms of payment that are being solicited right now should raise alarm flags. Anybody seeking entrance to your home right now should raise alarm flags. Anyone calling you and soliciting you or offering you something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. We're here to help if that happens.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. This is great, and I appreciate you being a resource in this time.
Thank you, Laura.
So thanks also to Shawna and Glen from the Institute on Aging. Really, this has been really helpful, and I've learned so much talking to both of you. And thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon, for taking time out of your day to get some resources and ask your questions. We really appreciate those as well. And you can find further reporting and also a recording of the webinar on our webpage, which is, as always, the San Francisco Public Press, sfpublicpress.org. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.